What do keto gurus think about a carnivore diet? Hi, I'm Dr. Eric Westman, and welcome to my channel where I review and debunk nutritional misinformation online. When I was reviewing the video by nutrition.com, I found an excellent video by one of my teachers about the carnivore diet. One of my teachers, Steve Phinney, is really one of the nutritional geniuses of our time. He doesn't go out on YouTube much. And in this video, he's actually being asked what he thinks about a carnivore diet. And I really wanted to share a glimpse of one of my teachers and also to see what he had to say if he had some concerns about an all-meat diet. Be sure to listen to the end when you get my final thoughts.
So our next question is coming from Travis, and he's asking, what is the research on completely carnivorous diets of all animal products? I think the first thing that comes to my mind is the Stefansson experiment.
There were two Arctic explorers
ate meat for a year
who lived among the Inuit in the Arctic as explorers and came back and said, hey, we could live without vegetables, fruit and vegetables for up to a couple of years at a time and not get sick. And that was when vitamin C was discovered as the cause of scurvy. And everybody knew if you took away vitamin C for 4 months, people would develop signs of scurvy, which aren't subtle. Your teeth get loose, your joints swell up and hurt. You have these little black spots where you have bleeding in the skin called petechial hemorrhages. And so a group of researchers said this is not possible. And they basically locked them up in a hospital. It was a mental hospital, Bellevue Hospital in New York City, and followed them for anywhere 3 to 5 months locked up. And when they didn't develop scurvy, they said, okay, you can move to an apartment down the street, but you got to come in every day to get checked. And they did this diet of just meat and fat. Now, they weren't eating the same things they had in the Arctic because they didn't have seal and seal blubber and
slightly
caribou and so on. So they were using market meats at the time. This was in the 1920s.
So this is a classic Steve Phinney story of a kind of obscure trivia that is really, really important, that Stefansson was in the Arctic and lived among the Inuit without eating carbs, but he came back to the modern civilization and they said it wasn't possible. So this is an interview, a response to a question actually by Travis of nutrition.com. What about all carnivore diets? And the interviewer here is Amy McKenzie, who is a PhD researcher with Virta Health. And this is an interview of question of what about an all-meat diet? So Stefansson got locked up into a hospital voluntarily to show that he could live just on animal-sourced foods. And he lived, which was surprising. By 4 months, everyone predicted that he would get scurvy. And as Dr. Phinney talks about it, it's not subtle. You lose your teeth, you can't have collagen to hold on to your connective tissue, you have bleeding, that sort of thing. And if you are following a carnivore diet and you develop these sorts of things, please let someone know that if you develop signs of scurvy. We haven't seen that happening and don't predict that it will. Just like in this story, it didn't happen.
Both of them remained very healthy for that whole year. But realize that both these people, they got to choose what they ate as long as it was from meat and fat.
Yep.
So they could have organ meats and things like that. And they had basically been trained by a group of people who'd lived for at least 50, the modern Inuit have lived in the Arctic for, I think archaeologists say 1,800 years. And so they had a time empirically to figure out what to eat and what proportions to eat. And so that's different than maybe if somebody just said, I'm just going to eat meat. They may not eat enough fat. They may not make their own broth. They may not follow those tenets as closely as the Aboriginal cultures did. So there were a lot of lessons that these Aboriginal cultures probably learned, and we, of European, Western civilization, may have discounted the value of those things.
He mentioned the eating of organ meats, and I remember that traditionally even animals would traditionally eat the entrails, or the eating offal, nose to tail, OFFAL, and yet debating among modern carnivore influencers that there's some that say all they do is eat the muscle of the animal, meaning the steak. And so this is one of those controversies that I would love to have more research shed on, but if you get liver and you add electrolytes or vitamins to this kind of approach, I think it's reasonable nutritionally, and I've talked about that before, even though there aren't large-scale studies about it yet.
Especially with respect to minerals.
Sure. And my concern, we see a lot of problems with sodium, potassium, and magnesium intakes in people who casually go onto a low-carbohydrate diet. And that particularly concerns me if somebody's not eating vegetables, because that's where a fair bit of the magnesium and potassium that our patients eat, that's where it comes from.
So when Steve Phinney says, I'm concerned, we have to listen. It's almost, remember those commercials E.F. Hutton says, and everyone's listening. So Steve has the most experience using low-carb keto diets. They came up with the term well-formulated adequate protein diet to describe the Virta implementation of a low-carb diet. And so here, you've heard this before, it's the electrolytes, the sodium, the potassium, the magnesium. And in my experience, it's people who are on medications already who develop issues with these electrolytes. Although in one of Steve's books called The Art and Science of Low Carbohydrate Nutrition and The Art and Science of Low Carbohydrate Performance, he talks about having 5 to 7 grams of salt per day once you're fully keto adapted, which is a lot more than the typical, low salt, low sodium diet that people are taught to follow contain. So you want to pay attention to the electrolytes. Add in the sodium, add in the potassium, the magnesium, especially if you have muscle cramps or constipation. Magnesium can be helpful to prevent and remedy that.
So if one doesn't eat vegetables, then it puts a more responsibility on that person to get enough of those minerals from the animal sources. And that may be an issue around making one's own broth, particularly bone broth. And again, it's not sticking a few bones in some water and boiling it for an hour. That's cooking it long enough to get those nutrients out of the bone and into the broth. Mm-hmm.
Well, I wanted you to hear on my channel, Professor Stephen D. Phinney, one of my teachers. Here he's talking about using electrolyte supplementation, creating a real bone broth for, steeping the bones for a long time to get the minerals out. Or you could just take an electrolyte supplement. I don't know why he didn't mention that. But anyway, it's again the story about Stefansson, who lived among the Inuit, wrote a book about it. Everyone was skeptical. He proved it by living under observation for a year. And because he didn't have any problems, it was kind of forgotten about. I'm reminded 100 years later, when we first started doing our low carb versus low fat studies, when other people did a low carb versus low fat study and found that low carb wasn't bad, they stopped doing studies on it because they wanted to show that it was bad. So 100 years ago, when Stefansson showed it wasn't bad, people didn't care anymore about it. They were on the vitamin C and other vitamins and also, anyway, let's keep our eyes wide open and learn about this and learn from Professor Phinney. So be aware of the electrolytes and the fat consumption as well when you're doing a carnivore diet. That's his take on it and therefore mine. I hope you find this helpful, and if you like, please like, subscribe, ring the notification bell. Look for new content on Wednesdays and Fridays. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell, and check out adaptyourlifeacademy.com.